We want to welcome everyone this afternoon to the NYSWANGA Remote Learning Series. We are excited to have you with us for strategies for maintaining momentum with remote learning. At this time, I'm going to hand it over to our presenter, Teresa Gibson.
All right, thank you, and welcome everybody. I'm excited to be here with you this afternoon for this hopefully very timely session for thinking about how do we maintain momentum with our students in this hybrid and remote environment that we are in this fall. And so let me just jump in. If you have not been with us in Zoom before, we just wanted to give you a quick orientation. Up along the top, you should see pictures of the other participants. And if your name showed up funny, you can click on your three little dots by you and rename yourself. We do ask that you stay muted unless prompted to join in, which we will have some interactivity today. But you can find that mute button by scrolling over the bottom of your screen, and it'll be on your lower left. And the same thing for your video. So for those of you who have your video on, thank you. That really does help us as facilitators to get to see you. And along that menu bar, it's also where you will find your chat feature. So that is where the materials for today's session are, and you can also access those materials on the website by going to the schedule and finding this session, Maintaining Momentum, and clicking the View Materials piece. All right, so with all of those logistics gone, I just want to introduce myself and my colleague, Nancy Mangum. Nancy and I are the founders of Leading Edge Learning, and in the Rural Life Grant and supporting this professional learning this afternoon. My slide's not loading. There we go. Can you all see that? It said it wasn't loading. You can? Okay, great. So before we just dive right in, we know that it's been a long day and this is afternoon, and I wanted to just invite you to think about today in this school day, this school year, in your house, at the school, wherever you are with us this afternoon, taking a moment to just check in with yourself as we go into this professional learning. Which character do you think you relate to the most right now? And you can just drop your response to that in the chat and thinking about, so are you feeling like, oh, this school year, I'm Goldilocks, I'm out of my element, feeling a little crazy? Are you feeling a little bit more like Voltron, defender of the universe, as you are navigating this constant battle? Or are you thinking you relate to Sonic right now, that everything you're doing is this requirement and everything is like, even your fast feels very slow, or your slow feels very fast to you right now? Or, I apologize. Or are you thinking you are solving problems with a calm and collected attitude? So thinking about all of those, I see that Catherine says she is feeling the fairy godmother. Anybody else? How are you feeling this afternoon? Thinking, for me this afternoon, I'm very much feeling the Sonic the Hedgehog effect, where everything I'm doing is, even my slow is fast right now, I'm going crazy, clicking slides wrong, etc. And Nancy says she is feeling like Voltron, trying to defend the universe, living in this constant battle. And Bethany says, trying to go to 4 and be that fairy godmother, but there's also a whole lot of 3 in there where you're feeling the rush. And thank you, John says, fairy godmother, right? Everybody's solving problems with this calm, cool, collected. And I do like to say that kind of when I check in with myself throughout the days, I definitely find myself in all 4 of these places. But stopping just to kind of reflect on your day and how you're feeling can be a really great thing to do with your students, to kind of acknowledge that we're all going through this together. We have good days, we have bad days, we even have good hours and bad hours. Having that connection with them is a really important piece of keeping them engaged in the conversation. And so today, Nancy and I are going to look at 3 key strategies that we say are essential for maintaining student engagement. And what we'd like to do with you all is immerse you in these strategies and kind of unpack them together as a group. And so you will be asked to kind of complete some tasks, do some activities with us, and then we will reflect back together on what did we just experience and how did it keep you engaged or not. So diving right in, we are going to start with this strategy of student choice. And so before I start talking about student choice and going on with the research piece, when I say student choice to you, what does that mean? What is when I say give students choice? What does that make you think of? What does that mean to you? And if you want to just drop your answer in the chat. I'll give you a minute. Thinking about student choice, what does that mean in a classroom? What ways can we offer students choice? Yeah, I think people are talking about learning paths for their assignments, giving students some kind of say in the content and process of learning. Yeah, and Linda's sharing, you know, when I think of choice, I just think about options. You know, oh, and voice. Thank you, Tracy. That's awesome. Thinking about student voice. Do our students have a voice? Are they engaged in the process of their learning? And another thing I often hear is kind of ownership, right? One thing about student choice is that we can be really creative about how we approach choice. And so as we think as educators about offering choices, some of the really low-hanging fruit for us as educators is thinking about giving students choice in a topic that they're going to pursue and the deliverable. So this is about show how you know, like what are you going to do to help me understand that you learned this? How are you going to show me? So giving them choice in that deliverable. And also giving them choice in media. So always asking students to read, always asking them to watch a video, always asking them to listen to audio. Anything that we're doing a lot of offering choice across media can be a really nice way to help students think about, you know, that check-in with self, which one of these do I think is going to help me learn? And you really start to build those non-cognitive skills in your students where they start to learn, okay, well, if I'm thinking about this, I know I would like to watch this video today, but tomorrow I know I need some quiet space right now, and so I'm going to choose something to read. But there are a lot of ways that we can really engage students with choice. And so what we're going to do is we're going to approach student choice from an immersion activity. One of the fears I hear a lot about giving students choice is that, like, how are they going to know what to choose? What are they going to do? How am I going to get them to still learn? And so what we're going to do is a professional learning activity. So you, my students today, will be adults, and you all are going to be asked to participate and to dive into the topic of collaboration. And specifically, we're going to think about collaboration when we're in a hybrid or remote environment. And so today, for this activity, I'm not going to give you a choice of topic, but what I am going to do is give you some instructions and then give you a little bit of freedom to choose your own pathway of how you create a response to my question. So we're going to jump in, and this is going to be just a model of how I would do it in a live professional learning session. And so I would start with a super mini lesson about what I mean when I talk about cooperation. And this is a graphic from John Spencer. And I think it's a really important thing to engage teachers with, but also to engage our students with, understanding the difference when we say we're cooperating and when we say we're collaborating. And so some of the major differences, I am going to pull out the highlights. Like the big and important difference when we think about cooperation, this is kind of a little more of an independent activity, but it does involve sharing ideas, right? And we want kids to be able to cooperate appropriately. So knowing when to share ideas and how to do that as a group is a cooperation skill. So when students are doing that and just sharing thinking and ideas, they're cooperating. the big distinction comes when we start to think about collaboration, and collaboration is an interdependent activity. And so they really need to rely on each other to construct something new. This says, generate entirely new ideas. It could be something like a new product, a new theory, but collaboration involves that generation of something new. So it's not just me saying, hey, did you see this resource? And then you go off and build something. It's us working together, depending on each other to create this product. And so before I jump on, does anyone have any questions or comments about the distinction between cooperation and collaboration?
I have a question, Teresa.
Yes.
Would we say then that the difference between these two is also what the product of these two looks like? Meaning, I think I heard you say that with collaboration, it's like you get to something new based on a mix of ideas, whereas maybe with cooperation, yes, people are sharing, students are sharing their thoughts, but it kind of stops there. You don't really see things mixed together to form a new.
Yeah, I think so. And I think some of that can be like a physically new thing, or some of it can just be a new way to think or talk about something when you're collaborating, that we come together to understand. So it's more of a back and forth between us that constructs new knowledge or a new product or a new thing. Whereas when we hear a bunch of shared ideas, we might take them or leave them. We might walk away and construct our own knowledge, but it doesn't necessarily always, the new thing isn't always co-constructed between us. And so, and Brandy says they have a shared folder for John Spencer. That's awesome. And this link is actually on the slide. So if you have the PDF that John shared at the beginning of this, you can take a look at this. And then in the activity, I do have a John Spencer option too, because I'm a little bit of a John Spencer nerd myself. So now that we've kind of have this high level idea of cooperation versus collaboration, what I really want you to do is start to push your thinking on what does collaboration mean in a hybrid environment? And so what I've given you, and Nancy's can drop these links in the slide, or I'm sorry, in the chat. If you don't have the slides pulled up, that's fine. What I'm going to do is give you the choice to explore any or all of these. You won't have time to explore them all in depth. So if you choose all, that's fair warning. Either a read or a listen or a look. A couple of them have some audio or video embedded in them. What I'm going to do is ask you to use these links to explore this idea of cooperation. And your goal is to answer this question. How can you foster collaboration in a remote or hybrid learning environment? And so what you're going to do, your assignment, is to use any or all of these resources in order to respond to this question. How can you foster collaboration in a remote or hybrid learning environment? And you can see from my timer that I'm planning to give you 8 minutes. In that 8 minutes, you have to explore the resource or resources that you choose, and then you have to provide a response. And in order to respond, you can choose any of these. You can make a slide. So there's a slide deck that's editable, and you can choose a slide and make your own response. You can respond via video doing a Flipgrid. You can choose to respond via audio. So if you just want to say your response quickly and you're a fast talker and that's your preference, you can do that. But if you do that, I need you to drop your response into the chat for me. Or you can surprise me by choosing another way to convey that information. But it has to be a way that is shareable back with the group. So 8 minutes to explore these resources and come up with your response to this questions. Before I start the timer, I just want to check with the group to make sure, are there any questions or clarity pieces that are needed? All right. Wonderful. You are welcome to chat me at any point in time while we wait this 8 minutes. I'm going to start the timer, and I'm going to turn that down a little bit so it's not so loud. And you are welcome to go explore. Okay. You've got just a couple more seconds to get your response. done or filmed. I see a couple of folks are choosing other and dropping their answer in the chat. I appreciate that. So if you want to check your colleagues' answers. No one yet is feeling brave enough to put a Flipgrid in. Oh, I see a couple of people making some notes in the collaboration slide deck. That is great. Yeah, so time is up for our exploration. And I am seeing people put some finishing touches on their responses. And so I would love, I'm in the slide deck and I am seeing some great responses here. I am wondering if Bethany, I see a response from you, Brooke or Brandy, are any of you willing to jump on the mic and just give us a quick summary of what you included here?
Sure, I will.
Thank you.
I created a slide and I ran out of time.
That's all right.
But I always was a sucker for a good acrostic. So I was trying to synthesize information from the Spencer article into, I guess, statements for each of the letters of collaboration. Each one starting with a verb is a way you could foster collaboration in a remote environment. So like consider that success is dependent on the relationship between the student and the content, the student, the instructor, and the student and classmates. That stood out to me. Acknowledge that distance learning can often lead to isolation. I know that's something my own child has said during this time. And then you can see some other thoughts that I've added there.
That's great. Thank you so much. Brooke, Brandy, either of you want to jump on?
I will. I'll just talk a little bit. I just used
Sure.
images instead of words, which is not normal for me because I'm usually a word person. But I was just thinking, I read the article that talked about 5 different ways, 5 different tips for fostering collaboration. And so really just focusing on team building activities, providing more flexibility in things such as grading or just your assignments, leveraging different tech options. So you'll see the different apps there, and then being sure to assign roles within the groups so that everyone's carrying equal weight. And even, so I thought that picture with the woman holding the chart could represent that, or even doing a pre-assessment and post-assessment just to see what students are learning, what they know before they collaborate, and then what they're learning from that collaboration.
That is awesome. Fantastic. And I love that it looks like all 3 of you maybe chose separate articles. And then I love that some people chose to use text, some people used image, and some people used both, which I think is a wonderful way to kind of personalize that response. There are a couple answers in the chat, and I think Catherine was kind of focused on how important the skills in collaboration are to develop for those learners. So it's not just that they're collaborating to construct something new and hopefully some new knowledge, but they're also building these non-cognitive skills along the way. I love that. And Tracy's, the things, it looks like maybe these are what stood out to you, Trace. Thinking about accountability to self and others and the roles that are needed to set up successful collaboration. And frequent assessing and check-ins. Yeah, and I think many of us as teachers have experienced I probably needed to give them a little more scaffolding along the way, right? Where you think like, go forth and group, and and it's not as magical as you maybe originally imagined it. It does look like nobody chose the Flipgrid. Did anybody chose the Vocaroo, the audio tool? If not, I do encourage you to take a look at that at some point in time. And so I just wanted to, before I move on, think about, so that was like a really quick jump into collaboration, right? But when we started this activity, I said we were just going to model an activity and the topic would be collaboration. But the goal was to think about student choice. And so now I would love for you to either jump on the mic or jump in the chat and kind of think about that experience. What choices did you get to experience and how did it make you feel? And this can be chat or mic. Oops, sorry. Anyone have thoughts? What did I let you choose? Brandy was thinking about what she was learning and how she would present what she learned, right? Those are a couple of choices that she hit along the way. Choice in the text, right? I did give you an option between several. Typically, if I gave you 4 options, I would give you a little more time, but the goal was to really have you experience that choice. Choice in how you present your results, and article and reflection choice. And so thinking about you as learners had a lot of choice, right? And you're adults and you're probably well prepared to make some of those choices, but thinking when we are supporting students in this hybrid environment, making sure, like I tried to stay available on the chat, I was scanning up and down to see if anybody looked like they were struggling, almost like if I were in my classroom, I would be doing as I walked around the room. So thinking about they might need a little bit of scaffold to help build some of the skills for choice, but that I could still do it with some focused and intentional implementation in this hybrid environment, or this fully remote. Yes.
So sorry. And I think it would probably be important that, let's say, for the options you gave us, make a slide, flip your response, audio response, that maybe at some point you taught kids how to do each of those very explicitly. So when they were offered the choice, they wouldn't then be learning it on their own.
Absolutely. And I always recommend limiting the number of tools you put in front of kids unless you know they have the comfort. It's also a reason I like Other, because no matter how much I play with technology, kids teach me new tools all the time. And so they might be comfortable with something else, and they might be able to show me what they learned in another way. And so thinking about being thoughtful about that. Yes, and so I love that Brandy's commenting on how many ways she got to make a choice, and then Brooke said, and also there was some structure in the choice, so it hopefully wasn't overwhelming. So thinking about that design. And so as we approach student choice, there's a lot of different ways. You don't have to offer several choices, but giving some pathways and options can be a great way to keep your students engaged. And then cleverly, Nancy and I thought, well, we should, if we're going to move to strategy 2 being peer-to-peer collaboration, we should really get them thinking about collaboration. So not only did we give you choice, but we were hopefully using that activity to activate your thinking about collaboration. And so thinking about the activity you just did, you were learning about collaboration, but I didn't ask you to collaborate, right? And so thinking about a lot of times when we think, oh, if we put kids together, they're going to collaborate, right? And this brings us back to that really important distinction that students can be just sharing ideas and not co-constructing knowledge or products. And that is an important skill, and it's an important piece of learning. But when we're talking about fostering collaboration between students to really build those skills where they're interacting to co-construct, it is a different type of experience. And so a couple of reasons that peer-to-peer collaboration are so important in school is because it is fostering these connections. And it's fostering connections not just between you and the student, but student to student. And so thinking about the challenge in a remote learning environment, even the kids that are coming to school some days, they're seeing each other a lot less. They feel a lot less connected to each other and to school. And so thinking about what the research tells us is that if students start to feel less connected, we start to see a lot more emotional and social struggles. And we also start to see this behavior like skipping school, which in a remote environment is almost all that more tempting, right? But kids that are starting to feel connected and are intentionally being engaged with others at school really do show a lot more academic success, and they tend to be a lot more likely to graduate. And then the piece that you all figured out right away and started talking about is that you are really, truly supporting not just new learning of the content, but through collaboration, you are starting to build some non-cognitive skills for these students, and you are supporting them along the way as they experience it. It can be really hard as teachers to think about dedicating time to support and scaffold students through these non-cognitive skills, but the research is very, very clear and replicated that supporting non-cognitive skills has an extremely positive impact on academic results. And we can think why, right, without even digging too deeply into all of the research, because when kids are doing these things and they're having to co-construct knowledge, they are not only having to be more self-aware, but they also have to be socially aware and responsible and have relationship skills and manage themselves along the way. And all of these non-cognitive skills really do lead to this lifelong success. So as we talk about what are we preparing these students for, all of these skills prepare them for whatever lies ahead. So thinking about the importance of peer-to-peer collaboration. When we think about peer-to-peer collaboration in a remote environment, one of the great challenges is really, like, how do you do it? And so just a couple of ideas before we move on for how to do it. There are, in a lot of the software owned by schools, a lot of schools will be a Google school, or OneNote is a Microsoft Teams school. Your software allows you to make collaborative documents. And so one of the ways you can foster collaboration is those slide decks that I created today. Kids can work together on a slide to co-construct knowledge. And if they can't live chat each other, it can create comments in these documents. And so thinking about in your school, in your classroom, what do you have access to that can allow this collaboration to happen? These types of collaboration can happen face-to-face or remotely. And if they're practiced while they're face-to-face, it can make remote learning even smoother. So thinking about those of you in a hybrid situation, how practicing some of this face-to-face can be really helpful from just a tech support side. And then thinking about other apps that allow live collaboration. And we tried to include just some free apps here because we don't want to ask to use a lot of things that we have to go through the whole district level approval to get some funding for. Padlet is a great app that you are going to see a little later that Nancy's going to use with y'all. And then Jamboard, if you've never used it, I highly recommend using it. It's a great application where you can write on this. They can write on the Jamboard, which it looks like a whiteboard, but they can also make little sticky notes. And so we love to do it to kind of bring together kids' thinking. It's a great affinity exercise for students. And then for younger students, a very similar type of collaboration app is Seesaw. And so we see Seesaw used with a lot of younger kids. And so before I jump off of tools that can support hybrid, does anyone have any they want to share either on the mic or in the chat with other folks? All right, so if they're not popping in your head right now, but you think of one as we move throughout the presentation, you are welcome to just jump right in.
All right, thanks, Teresa. So our first two strategies were collaboration and
student choice. Student choice.
Student choice. I was like, wait a minute, feedback, but no. Thank you, Teresa, student choice. So student choice and collaboration were our first two. Our last strategy is the 10-minute rule. So on the next slide, you'll see when we think about the brain, we know that our brains have limited capacity. And let's not talk about time right now. Let's just talk about information. So the younger the student is, the less capacity that has to hold different bits of information. So you can see their elementary students 1 to 2 bits. As we get a little bit older, maybe middle school students up to 4 bits, and then high school 3 to 5 bits, maybe even up to 7 bits of information. And this is all within our working memory that we hold this. And so this might be something like add 3 numbers or 3 different sets of numbers and then add up the total all in your mind, right? That might be something. Or, 3-step directions or 2-step directions. Teresa, a few minutes ago, gave you a couple of steps to do. And that worked because hopefully we're all adults and we could process that, hold those steps. But our younger students, we know maybe need less directions at one time. When we give more than a certain number of bits of information or ask students to hold that in their working memory, Teresa, if you'll click next, sometimes we see that students have their minds or their brains, they reach their capacity. They forget the direction. Sometimes they get frustrated or lose focus. And sometimes we replace, like we switch things up in our mind. And this might have happened to us too, as adults from time to time when we're trying to remember too many things. We're trying to remember a phone number and write it down. And then, somebody comes in and interrupts us and we've forgotten it. So we have to remember that our brain has limited capacity. It's not just the bits of information, it's also the time. And so on the next slide, you'll see that we want to remember that younger students can really only spend about 5 to 10 minutes of information focused on passive learning. And we're going to talk in just a minute about what that passive learning is. But, and again, all of this, age, developmentally, some students might mature more quickly, others maybe take a little bit longer. But, you think of our younger students, younger than 14, about 5 to 10 minutes. On the next slide, you'll see our high school students or students that are older than 14, about 10 to 15 minutes. Again, this is on passive learning. And this comes from the research from Sousa and Tomlinson there. So let's take a look at what we mean by passive versus active. So passive is listening to direct instruction. What you're doing right now with me, that's passive. I'm talking to you, or I'm lecturing to you. I'm giving you information. Reading academic text. So this is different than reading a book for pleasure. This is when we're talking about that academic text. That is considered passive. Listening to a recording, again, passive, or watching a video or demonstration. We know that active learning, these are just some examples of active learning, but discussing, practicing concepts, applying what we've learned, creating something, that's all active. So let's go back to that rule again for just a minute. And when you click on the next slide, let's think about our younger students, our students that are younger than 14. Remember, less than, about 5 minutes is about, so listening to direct instruction. We can only do that for about 5 minutes, and then maybe we switch to something like discussion, a turn and talk, right? We often do this, turn and talk to your neighbor. We might have them read something, but we don't want it to be too lengthy. If it's too long, maybe we split it up and chunk it. And then maybe we ask them to reflect. So think about, what does this remind you of? Right? Or write down what you're thinking about, or what do you think the next, what do you think the character is going to do next? So having them reflect, that breaks up, that goes from passive, which is reading the text, to that active instruction or active learning. Watching a video. Sometimes we think, oh, it'll be great. We can record these great videos, these video lectures. But if we go to our high school students, longer than 15 minutes, 10 to 15, and some people would say even with video, it might even be shorter. But 10 to 15 minutes is about all we can take in before our brain is filled up. We're not going to learn anymore. So it doesn't matter how amazing the video is. If it's too long and we don't stop and pause and give some kind of application there, then we're not going to retain that information. Something like Edpuzzle is great for this, because we can put the tool of Edpuzzle, we can put a video in there and stop and ask questions along the way. And so Edpuzzle helps us to break up that. And then if we're listening to a recording, we might just need to let people take a break, stand up and take a break. But all of these are showing how we can go from passive to that active learning and switch the modality. Remember, it doesn't mean that our class can only be 10 minutes long or 15 minutes long. It just means we have to switch it up. So that's really where this 10-minute rule comes into play. And for our younger students, we might want to think of it as the 5-minute rule. So you can adjust that time there. It might be a 5-minute rule, it might be a 10-minute rule. But we have to be really mindful of this, especially in a remote environment if we want to keep people engaged. So let's try it in an activity. Let's talk about different types of engagement. Okay, and I'll give you just a minute to read this here. There are 3 different types of engagement: behavioral, cognitive, and emotional. And I'll let you just read there for a minute what each of those types of engagement mean. So this is kind of important. These 3 different types of engagement are important as we think about our learners. You know, sometimes we think, okay, we're just going to judge engagement by walking into a classroom and seeing, you know, who's on task or who's turning in assignments. That would be more of the behavioral, right? Are they following the directions? Are they turning in the assignments? But what about the cognitive? Somebody might be turning in assignments, or they might be looking like they're working, or they're reading their text, but are they actually engaging and making connections with what they're doing and what they're learning? And then we have the emotional side, and the emotional side is, how do I feel as a learner? All 3 of these are important as we think about engagement. Sometimes, again, I think we often kind of default to that behavioral engagement, but we really need to think about both the cognitive as well as the emotional. So here's an activity for us to think about how we can maybe engage our learners at all 3 of these levels: the cognitive, the emotional, and the behavioral. So I'm going to put this Padlet link in the chat. And what I want you to do is I want you to select one of the 3 resources to read about engagement. One is actually a podcast. You probably won't have time to read to listen to the entire podcast, but you can. It's a Cult of Pedagogy, which they're always great about having the audio recording if you'd like to do that. So here's the Padlet, and you'll select one. Then after you listen to your or dive into your resource, I want you to share your insights via Padlet by making a comment. And once you've made a comment or shared an aha thought, then you can look at others and you can respond to them by making a connection to what they said or by asking a question. So I just gave you 3 directions. The first thing is to select your resource. The second is share your insight. And then the third is respond to someone else. All right. I'm going to give you 5 minutes to do this, to take a look. I think everybody should be able to get to the Padlet there. And let's look for some strategies that we can use to engage our learners, both behaviorally, cognitively, and emotionally. And I'm going to set the timer on my phone. I'll let you know when we have a 1-minute warning. All right, about a minute and a half left. So if you'll go ahead and share an insight by making a comment there on Padlet, you can click the plus. All right, I'm going to give you a minute to read some of the other comments that people have left, and you can respond to their comment. You can make a connection or ask a question or just add on. Maybe it sparks an idea. And remember, when you're on Padlet, like under the Let's Get Techie, or the 3 technology tips, that one several people commented, so you might have to just kind of hover and it'll allow you to scroll down and read all the comments. So I'm going to give you a minute to kind of look over some others and make a connection and maybe respond. All right. Let's come back together. And does anybody want to just share one quick aha they had or connection that they made? You can use the microphone there if you'd like to.
Yes, and I think, so I saw Brooke's comment that it's not, the commenting feature, I think we did not turn it on, so our apologies. Normally you can just click right there on any and comment directly on it. So our apologies, that was a setup issue.
Yeah, it looks like a lot of great responses here that, you know, somebody made the comment about, it's great to see that a lot of these ideas can be used both in person as well as online. And I think that's a great thing to note for teachers, and also for you all as coaches to think about too, that even though we haven't been in this remote environment all the time, that if we use some of our good strategies and structures that we do face-to-face, and how can we take those and convert those or make those online to engage our learners. I think.
Nancy, I think that's really important for teachers right now as well who are teaching in a hybrid environment and they're teaching both online learners and in-person learners at the same time. So using some of those same tools to engage both of them at the same time is really critical.
Yeah. So we're going to end that activity. Thank you, Brooke. I think that's a perfect way to end it. And now, the activity we just did was about engagement, but I want you to think about the 10-minute rule or the 5-minute, the 5-minute rule. How did I use this with this activity? So Teresa, if you don't mind just going back maybe a couple slides to the my lecture slide, and I'll kind of help us out here because, so I had, go forward. No, keep going to where it says engage.
This one.
There you go. So remember, I started out, I gave you some learning in this activity, and then you worked on the Padlet. So now I ask the question, how did I use my 10-minute rule?
I think the time was broken up between me taking information in and then doing something with what I learned. So you shared, then I took information in myself, then I shared my own comment, then I connected to someone else's comment. There were several things that were happening in that one activity.
There you go. And you did some reading too. Yeah. So, and to Brooke's point, thank you, Bethany. To Brooke's point, this is something that could be done when I'm teaching in a hybrid environment, couldn't it? I could give a mini lesson or, which my mini lesson was on engagement and the different types of engagement. It was real quick, might have been a few minutes longer, depending on what you're teaching, but you have a mini lesson. Then you send students off to do some work. And the work did involve a little choice too. So we got that one in there. But, and so they went from the passive to the active, or maybe passive again because they had to read, but then it was active in that they were commenting and responding to one another. All right. I know we're almost out of time, so let's go to our next slide here. And just remember, so we shared 3 strategies today for maintaining that student engagement: the student choice, the peer-to-peer collaboration, and the 10-minute rule. And again, you might want to make that a 5-minute rule or a 7-minute rule, depending on the age of your students. Hopefully we used several strategies that engaged you as a learner. If you want to share in the chat, maybe what strategies engaged you the most. Because just like all of our students are different, we're all different. And so, for somebody, it might have been, oh, there was a really great article and the choice in the article. And somebody else might have been excited that they got to jump on the microphone and share. And so just like for us, different strategies engage us. For our students is the same. Yeah, so Brooke said the choice was, and so did Bethany. So Bethany agreed. And Candace, yeah, this just shifting from thing to thing was engaging. And maybe, hopefully we gave you a couple quick topics or a couple different things to think about kind of quickly. And Linda says the choice. So we know that you all are all, if you need the certificate on the next slide, actually, before we get to the certificate, it's always good to have some reflection. And so the stoplight is a protocol that Teresa and I loved, that we love to use. You might want to think about one thing that I should stop doing. Maybe I need to stop spending, creating a 20-minute video lecture that I expect my students to watch, because that is too much passive without any kind of way to break up that learning. The yellow is there one thing I want to start doing or I want to think about more. And then the green is what should I continue to do? What should I keep on doing that I'm doing well, that this maybe gave me some affirmation? And so with this, the evaluation, if you are, we would love some feedback on this. And I think John just dropped it in the chat. So you have that evaluation. And just wanted to let you know that this is part of the Rural Life Project. And we're glad that you joined us today. Thank you. And Bethany, anything else, or are we
Now, I just want to thank you all for leading this session. Thank you, Teresa and Nancy.
Yes, thank you all.
It was very